All right, this is going to be chapter 11, the 1960s, and this is another lecture that has a lot of information in it. This is really, the 60s is really social activism. You have a lot of activism. You have the Greensboro sit-in at Woolsworth. You have the civil rights movement moving along. You have weather satellites, space age technology. You have Kennedy and Nixon campaign, and you have some of the building towards Vietnam, and you have the hippies. But the main culture defying the 1960s is going to be the activism of the younger generation, the college students. Okay, so let's go back to Castro and the Cuban Missile Crisis. Okay, so what the Cuban Missile Crisis is like I said before, in 1959, Fidel Castro, he overthrows the Cuban government and he establishes his own communist totalitarian government. Now, Cuba is only 90 miles from Florida, so it is not far. So, what happens is President John F. Kennedy, he's newly elected in 1961. He's worried that if the U.S. acted too aggressively to the Soviet Union with Berlin and everything, that being that Cuba was their buddies and they put missiles on Cuba, and Cuba's 90 miles from Florida, that you could have where they fire missiles on the United States and are within range. So what we have, a few different things. The first thing is called the Bay of Pigs. And if you look at the map, you see the little area called the Bay of Pigs. What this is when Kennedy took office, well, before he took office, the CIA had developed a plan to remove Castro. And then Kennedy approved of it early in his presidency. So what the CIA did was they trained about 1,400 Cuban exiles, so people who had fled Castro's rule. And the plan was that these people, well, they were military people, they knew Cuba, they knew all the places, and they also had the CIA training. So their plan is to go in and remove Castro themselves. So they're going to invade Cuba at the area called Bay of Pigs, April 16th, 1961. And the goal is for these people to go in, not Americans, but these trained Cubans, and they're going to spark a rebellion, and with this, they're going to overthrow Castro. But the invasion was a complete disaster. So Castro's forces crushed the attackers within 3 days. And these Cuban exiles that were trained by the United States and funded by the United States, they all surrender April 20th. As you can imagine, not a really good look. So Kennedy takes full responsibility for doing it. And of course, it kind of weakens Kennedy's approval rating. So then we go into 1962, so a year later, the American U-2 spy plane, it photographs something that they feel is quite alarming. The Soviet Union is installing nuclear missiles in Cuba. And remember, Cuba's 90 miles from Florida. So these missiles could reach major cities in the U.S. in minutes. And the United States felt that they would become operational within weeks. And at the same time, the U.S. is going to put their nuclear missiles in Turkey. Because in Turkey, they can hit the Soviet Union. So we have the Soviet Union putting their missiles in Cuba, 90 miles away from Florida, pointing them towards the U.S., and we have the U.S. then putting their missiles in Turkey, pointed at the Soviet Union. So both sides are staring each other down, and both sides have nuclear weapons pointed at each other. So this is going to be known as the closest the world had come to a nuclear war. All right, so Kennedy wants to do a full invasion of Cuba. Well, actually, he has several different options. Full invasion of Cuba, a naval blockade, which would then stop any more Soviet missiles from arriving, diplomatic negotiations, but Kennedy chose the blockade. So what they did was they put American ships and they surrounded Cuba with American ships so that no vessels could come in and no more missiles could be delivered to Cuba. And then you had several tense talks between the U.S. and the USSR. The U.S. promised not to invade Cuba, and they also agreed to remove their missiles from Turkey, and that the USSR would remove their missiles from Cuba. So both countries are going to remove their missiles. And to make sure there were no, quote, misunderstandings in the future, they created a hotline, a direct communication link between Washington and Moscow, because Moscow was the capital for the USSR. So that ended the Cuban Missile Crisis. Americans were banned from traveling or trading with Cuba, and that lasted until 2014. Obama's administration actually eased up some of that stuff, but now we are not in real good standing again with Cuba. Okay, Nixon. So Richard Nixon, he has a summit, so a summit's like a meeting, with the Soviets. President Kennedy had met with the Soviets too. In 1961, oh, I'm sorry about that. I have that wrong. I'm sorry. Nixon met with the Soviets, but it wasn't successful. That will make a little bit more sense. So Nixon goes over and he has a summit with the Soviets, which is a meeting. That's not successful. So then Kennedy has, and Kennedy's the president at this time, he has a meeting with the Soviets in 1961. And it becomes tense and kind of a power play and intimidation rather than really getting anything done. Okay, so at the same time, you have East Germans who are fleeing to the West. Remember West, Western, U.S. is West, Western Hemisphere, West. Okay, that is democracy, and your East is going to be more of your communist. So we're back in Berlin, and we have the East, which is communist, the West, which is democratic. And what they're going to do is they're literally going to build a wall right down the city, separating families. There is some awesome videos, if you pull them up on YouTube, of people running as the wall's going up right behind their apartment. They're jumping out of their windows, trying to land over on the other side of the wall to the free side. And as the wall's going up, people are trying to run to get over to the free side. If you could imagine your neighborhood and a wall just going straight down the middle, separating you from your neighbors, that's what it is. So it starts as barbed wire and then eventually becomes this huge wall with, different explosive mines, all different things to keep the two separated. And the Berlin Wall in 1961, as it goes up, is actually going to become the symbol of the Cold War. And then when it comes down, that will be the symbol of the Cold War ended. So what, again, East Germany is trying to do, East Germany's communist, like we said before, if you want to control people, you have to block any news, any knowledge, anything coming in. So they don't want the Western ideas of freedom, democracy, capitalism. They do not want that coming into their people. So the East and West will be split. And then the physical division, of course, is the wall. And so it'll stand for 28 years. Families are going to be separated until 1989, when the wall actually comes down and it signals the end of the Cold War. So I have some pictures here for you. If you look at the lower picture, that is, of course, the guy standing on the wall. That is 1989. Okay, so if you look at this picture, this is 1980. Okay, look closely at what they're wearing. Look at the bus up top. You see the bicycle and that cart looking thing. This is Soviet stagnation. So from 1964 to 1982, nothing changed in this country. Okay, this is obviously East Berlin. You're going to have a standard of living drop. You're going to have alcoholism, widespread corruption. Nobody's going to question the government because they're going to be afraid of being punished. Human rights violations. And you can just tell, this looks like you're looking at a picture from, the 40s, when it's actually the 80s. So there is absolutely no change. That's why it's called stagnation. Nothing changes. Okay? That's East Berlin. That's on the east side of the wall. Now, that's West Berlin. Same time period, 1980. I don't even need to tell you the difference you should be able to see in how more modern this side of the wall is. Okay? All right, the Vietnam War. This is going to be one of your most controversial, unpopular conflicts in American history today. So this is going to begin in the 60s. This again is Cold War. It's going to be North against South. South will be backed by America, and then North will be backed by the USSR. This war is going to rely heavily on draft, meaning you have no choice. Your number comes up, you have to go. And you automatically are put into the draft, I think, when you're 18. It used to just be men, but now it's men and women. So if we had a draft again and your number came up, you would be forced to go to war. This is what happens when I record all day. You'd have to go to war or prison. This is where you're going to get, during this time period, first off, amazing music. But you also are going to get a lot of activism, because kids who went to college or their parents had any money or any connection in government, they didn't go. Okay, they were able to get out of the draft. They didn't have to go to Vietnam. And your people who did go to Vietnam were going to be your more poor people without any connection. So Vietnam is also going to be the first televised war, and that's going to change things, because on the nightly news, people are actually going to be able to see what war actually looks like and what is happening in Vietnam. So it being televised is going to be a game changer. This is a difficult war because you're fighting in villages, in jungles. You're fighting North Vietnam, but you also have what's called the Viet Cong, which were South Vietnamese that were communist and were connected to North Vietnam, but yet they were in the South, blending in as villagers, farmers. So you never knew who was really the enemy and who was not. And again, these guys did not sign up to go to Vietnam. The majority of them were drafted. You also are going to have new military technologies. You have helicopters, you have rapid movement. advancement in machine guns, but you're going to have controversial chemicals used, different chemical agents like napalm and Agent Orange. This kind of herbicide spread to destroy the jungle coverage. Because they're fighting in the jungle, so that the Americans could kind of see where they were going more, but that, of course, is going to end up poisoning them when they get back to the States and get older. Okay, so let's look at the Vietnam War. Try and make this as short as I can. So the Vietnam during imperialism were controlled by the French, and the Vietnam becomes a focal point during this Cold War tension. So Vietnam was temporarily divided at the 17th parallel, with the intention that eventually they would have national elections and they would unify the country, but those elections never occurred. So this division created two opposing governments. You had North Vietnam that's led by Ho Chi Minh, and then he's a communist, and he's supported by the Soviet Union and China. Then you had South Vietnam that was led by Dinh Diem, and he's anti-communist, and he's backed by the United States, so we're backing his weapons, his military campaigns. And inside, like I said before, inside South Vietnam, which is where we are, right? That's who we're supporting. You also had what's called the Viet Cong, and they were operating secretly, but they were actually with the North. They're directed by the North. So very confusing who you're fighting. So Vietnam, through the lens of the Cold War, is a global rivalry between the U.S. and its allies promoting capitalism and democracy, and the Soviet Union and China promoting communism. So American leaders fear, again, the domino theory, believing that if Vietnam fell to communism, the other neighboring countries like Cambodia, Thailand would also follow suit. So they want to make sure that Vietnam does not fall to communism and kind of becomes this symbolic test of U.S.'s resolve and credibility in the Cold War, that they're going to turn a regional conflict into actually a major international battleground. But again, they want to show that you can stop communism and you can not have other countries come under communist rulers. So by the 1960s, the conflict in Vietnam is intensifying as the North Vietnam, they launch a guerrilla war against the South in 61. And then in 1964, tensions are escalated even more with what's called the Gulf of Tonkin incident. So August 2nd, North Vietnamese patrol boats fire upon the USS Maddox in the Gulf of Tonkin, which is a U.S. ship. And the attack then occurs again 2 days later. So the U.S. ship reported the second attack. And then later evidence actually suggests that the incident may never have happened due to poor weather and unclear radar signals, and was just a big misinterpretation. But anyways, Johnson is, it's his administration, and he sees these two attacks, although one might not have happened, as clear aggression. And on August 7th, the Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, because at this time, the Congress had to pass things that involved war. Not so much now. That was sarcastic. They are supposed to pass it if we're just not going through the right channels right now. Okay, so they passed the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. And this gives President Johnson, who's known as LBJ, like the highway, the authority to use military force in Vietnam. So he sends combat troops to conduct operations without actually declaring war. So this resolution effectively, what it does is it opens up the door for a full-scale U.S. involvement. And by 1965, American combat troops were being deployed into South Vietnam. So despite the powerful military that the United States does have, or did have at this time too, they're going to struggle against the Viet Cong. And they're going to have to start relying on guerrilla tactics to fight, because they're fighting in the jungle. But the Viet Cong, they're blending in with the civilian population, so they just can't tell who's who. So the Gulf of Tonkin incident, it's important because it's just this defining moment, and it demonstrates how quickly these Cold War tensions can escalate and how public perception can really be shaped by how the government messages things. So the U.S. is going to get deeper and deeper into this conflict. And by the mid 1960s, the U.S. involvement in Vietnam deepens, and by 65, the United States has sent large numbers of combat troops and launching heavy bombing campaigns. One is called Operation Rolling Thunder, in the effort to weaken North Vietnam and help South Vietnam. But despite the military technology, the firepower, air, senior support, air support that we have, the war is going to just continue to be a stalemate, not really getting anywhere. And like we talked about, the Viet Cong is a huge issue. So by 1967, U.S. leaders continued to assure the public that victory was close, but the reality was that it was far more complicated. You have rising casualties, you have no clear progress at all. But yet they're trying to show that they are being very successful in the war, the United States. Well, things are going to change with what's called the Tet Offense, T-E-T, Tet Offense. Tet, T-E-T, was a Vietnamese New Year. Okay, so it was a time of celebration. And what was actually supposed to happen is that on this day, everybody's going to stop fighting, and you're going to celebrate with your community, your town, your little village, and we're just going to kind of take the day off. But, and everybody's going to honor the Tet, T-E-T, Vietnamese New Year. But not quite what happens. So what happens and how it becomes the Tet Offense is that the South had smuggled in along the Ho Chi Minh Trail different weapons, different soldiers, different people, and then you also had the South, the Viet Cong in the South. And the Tet Offense, you had the North and the Viet Cong attack over 100 towns and cities, capturing up to 44 capitals and provinces, and even attacking the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. So it really showed that the U.S. did not have control of Vietnam and was not advancing in Vietnam like they had been told. So the Tet Offense shattered the public confidence and really revealed that the enemy was much stronger and more organized, and we were not going to be able to win this war that we were in. So the people in the United States really started to protest and lost favor in the war, and started turning against any ideas of being in this war, and they wanted the Americans out of the war. So in response for the way that the attitudes had changed in America after the Tet Offense, President Johnson halts the bombing of North Vietnam in 68. He calls for peace talks, and he later announces that he's not going to seek re-election. So that fall in 69, Richard Nixon is going to become the new president. He's going to introduce legislation called Vietnamization, and it's going to be a policy aimed at withdrawing U.S. troops and shifting the responsibility of the war to the South Vietnamese forces. So you can see why the Tet Offense stands out as this turning point in really exposing what was happening in Vietnam through, the TV, through the news, what was happening in Vietnam, and signaling that the U.S. was in over their head and they were not going to win this conflict. So let's see, let me go further. What else do we have? Okay, so the Vietnamization. So in 73 is when the U.S. troops begin to withdraw in 1973. And then in 75 is when we're going to have the fall of Saigon. And that event I'm going to talk about when we get to the lecture over the 70s. This is just a picture showing you, the different people in Vietnam. Okay, so let's look at the 60s, and we're going to look at the home front, what's going on in the 60s. You have Martin Luther. Down to the left, you have Kennedy, and then you have a bus with a bunch of hippies on it. So, like I said, this is going to be the decade of standing up for activism. You have the civil rights movement, but by Martin Luther King Jr., challenging segregation, demanding equal rights. You're going to have marches, sit-ins. You have the freedom rides. You have going on, you have the Vietnam War that we just talked about. You're going to have assassinations of John F. Kennedy. You're going to have also during this period the hippie movement, which is a rejection of traditional values and trying to embrace peace and anti-war activism. Okay, so let's talk about Kennedy. John F. Kennedy, he's going to take the presidency in 1961. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Now, the scandalous thing about him was that he was Catholic. Okay, so he's the first Catholic to hold office. His vision is going to be called the New Frontier, calling Americans to service. Like I said, I just read his famous challenge, ask not what you can do for your country, ask what, I'm sorry, I read that wrong. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Okay, so he is anti-communist. He is going to increase military spending. He is going to launch programs like the Peace Corps. He is going to support space programs. He wants to land a person on the moon. Despite his popularity, a lot of his domestic goals are going to stall in Congress and not get approved. He's a Democrat. He is very strong in fighting poverty, expanding federal support for education, creating health care for the elderly, and he wants to pass strong civil rights protections. Okay, we talked about the Bay of Pigs. That was in 1961, the same year he got inaugurated to be president. He took full responsibility for that. And then in 62, he had the Cuban Missile Crisis. That's where we had missiles on Florida to hit the U.S. and missiles in Turkey to hit the USSR. In 1963, he's going to work on the Civil Rights Bill. And then in 1963, in Dallas, Texas, he is going to be assassinated. the 60s have a lot of assassinations. He's going to be assassinated in Dallas, and that's what you see, the lower middle car with Jackie Kennedy in the pink. She's trying to get out of the car. The president was just shot. So you see her smiling and looking. You can see the president's elbow in her hat, and then he gets shot, and she's trying to crawl out. So the president gets shot. LBJ was the vice president. So they're going to rush Kennedy to Parkland Hospital. They're unable to save him. That's why Parkland is now called Parkland Memorial Hospital. Whenever you have memorial, it's honoring the dead, and it's there for Kennedy. So they're unable to save him, and so everybody is going to be taken to Air Force One. If you LBJ, Lyndon B. Johnson, is the colored picture on the left. If you look down at the lower picture, you see Jackie Kennedy. If you look at her skirt, she still is in the same outfit, and that's the blood of her husband on her skirt. Jackie Kennedy was an amazing woman, is an amazing woman. So anyways, she stands there because they, get the vice president on the plane. They get all the people on the plane to fly back to Washington. And Jackie Kennedy is standing next to LBJ as he gets sworn in as the next president. So this is also the woman there. That's going to be the first time a woman swears a president in. So he's going to fly back to Washington. He's going to try and take care of a lot of the things that that Kennedy was already working on. He's going to close some of that up. He is going to ratify the 24th Amendment. His whole push is going to be called the Great Society. In 64, he wins in a landslide election, and he's reelected. He is going to, like I said, he's going to continue the war on poverty. That's going to be a major thing that he deals with. His campaign, his domestic agenda is called the Great Society, and it's really kind of just a new type of New Deal. He's working on some of the stuff that the New Deal did for people. Like I said, he's going to do Head Start. He's going to get food stamps, preschool programs, Medicare, Medicaid, the Immigration Act of 1965, which will end different immigration quotas that we had for the country. So he's really focused also on the people and helping the people who need the help the most. His presidency is going to be defined by social reforms at home, which means for the United States. He does deepen the conflict in Vietnam. It does escalate under his leadership in 63 and 64. Let's see, what else can we talk about with him? What else does he do? He escalates the war. Martin Luther, during his presidency in 1968, is going to get assassinated. In 1968, Robert F. Kennedy, that's the president's brother, he was starting to get involved in politics. He's going to get assassinated. And then in 1968, Johnson declines to seek re-election again, and he announces it over the television, citing the division because of the Vietnam War. And so he actually leaves office in 69, and President Nixon will come in at that point. Okay, let's jump to civil rights. We have 1960 Greensboro 4 and 1961 the Freedom Riders. So the Greensboro 4, this is going to be a lunch counter. They wanted to be able to sit at the lunch counter where the white people were sitting. It's going to be February 1st, 1960. These four guys are college freshmen from North Carolina. They're going to walk into Woolworth, which was a department store in Greensboro, North Carolina, and they're going to sit down at an all-white lunch counter. So although they're allowed to shop in the store, they weren't permitted to sit and eat because of segregation laws. So instead of leaving, the students quietly remain in their seats and refuse to move. This is again an action of nonviolent civil disobedience inspired by Gandhi, that Martin Luther King Jr. It's his philosophy. It's what he's going to use. And it's especially powerful because these students were just ordinary young students, and they're going to help spark this national movement. So the next day, more students join them, and by the end of the week, they have hundreds participating in the sit-in across North Carolina, then across the South. Eventually, it reaches 55 cities in 13 different states. So you see the lower picture where students are going to harass them. And you also see that it's not just black students, it's also white students who are helping in this movement. And they're just going to sit, they're not going to fight back, they're going to be insulted, they're going to have food poured on them, as you see. And that's what a peaceful, nonviolent protest is. They'll get arrested, but eventually that lunch counter is going to be desegregated. So this, of course, is another turning point of activists actually, by not using any violence, making a huge change. This also is going to create the SNCC committee, which is Student Nonviolent Coordinating Community. And they're going to be a large part of the civil rights movement. Then in 61, you have black and white activists known as the Freedom Riders. They're going to go out on a bus and challenge segregation in the Deep South. So although the Supreme Court had ruled that segregation in interstate buses, so interstate buses who travel between different states, was illegal, southern states still ignored that decision. So to test whether the federal ruling would be enforced, a group called CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, organized the first Freedom Ride. It left Washington, D.C., May 4th, 1961, with riders traveling on Greyhound, and the buses are going to go towards New Orleans. Their plan's quite simple. It's just to sit in integrated pairs on the bus and use the facilities, waiting rooms, restrooms, lunch counters that were still segregated. So as the riders move deeper into the South, violence escalates. And in Alabama in 1961, a mob firebombs one of the buses, forcing the riders to crawl out of the bus because it's burning. In Birmingham, riders were beaten with pipes and clubs while police deliberately just stayed away. So despite the brutality, the riders still refused to fight back because they still were going to practice nonviolent resistance. And this is just such a focal point on how Martin Luther King Jr. Influenced and ran these protests, that these people are not going to use violence. Most all of this, like I've told you before, all of this activism is coming from college-age students. So the Freedom Riders became another turning point in the civil rights movement again, showing the power of the young people and the effectiveness of the nonviolent protest. So those are two examples. Okay, then we have Birmingham, 1963, and the March on Washington, also in 1963. So you had Martin Luther King Jr. He is going to head towards Alabama. Alabama was one of the most segregated cities in the South. And in 63, King and local leaders are going to launch what they call the Birmingham Campaign. And all it is just a series of marches, sit-ins, boycotts, just designed to challenge the segregation in downtown businesses. So King is going to get arrested in April of 1963, and he's going to write his famous letter from Birmingham jail. And you can see his pictures down below, his mugshot. He's going to defend nonviolent resistance and explain why waiting for justice was no longer acceptable. In May, the movement will intensify with the Children's Crusade, where hundreds of young people marched peacefully, and Birmingham's police chief, Connor, he responds with police dogs and high-pressure fire hoses, and images of children being attacked were broadcast nationwide across the TV, which shocked Americans and increased support for the civil rights movement. Birmingham in Alabama in 63 is going to agree to desegregate public facilities, and that becomes one of the movement's most important victories. So then building on the momentum from that, you have the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedoms in August 28th of 1963. More than 250,000 people are going to gather at Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., which is the picture you see down on the right, making it the largest civil rights demonstration in American history at this time. The march is going to call for fair employment, equal rights, and an end to segregation. This is where Martin Luther will deliver his famous speech, I Have a Dream. After that, you have in 64 the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So together, both of these campaigns are going to, again, show the power of nonviolent protest, and they're going to be major changes for civil rights legislation. Okay, so in 1965, you're going to have the Selma March. You're going to have several different things happen. You have activists trying to register votes in the South, and it's going to be met with a lot of violence. So you have 61, you have different movements like the Freedom Riders, Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. Then you have the Selma March. This is where you're going to have different young people. They're going to try and march from Selma to Montgomery. They're going to be working on registering voters in the South. You're going to have Bloody Sunday, March 7th, 1965, where you have people being killed. Again, some of the same things that happened before. They're going to be beat by state troopers. You're going to have dogs attack them. Then you have 2,000 marchers that King, both black and white, is going to attempt to lead across the bridge. In March 17, LBJ is going to address the nation. He's going to say his famous words: there is no Negro problem, there is no Southern problem, there is no Northern problem, there is only an American problem. Then you have the success of the march, where they actually are going to be protected by the U.S. Army, and they're going to complete their march from Selma to Montgomery. Okay, so we now have a different kind of protest that we're going to move into. You know that Martin Luther was nonviolent resistance, but we're going to start to have this idea of 1966 of Black Power. Okay, this idea that is going to become a rally cry for a new generation. Black Power was more of a multifaceted movement. It's going to emphasize this idea of Black unity, culture pride, and self-determination. So many African Americans, they want to embrace the African clothing, wear the Afro hairstyle, and promote the idea that Black is beautiful. For some, Black Power meant strengthening Black communities, but for others it meant an actual separation from the white society and building an independent Black institutions. So Malcolm X is going to really help shape this new direction. So he's going to come on the scene. He rejects his slave name and he replaces it with an X to symbolize his lost African ancestry. So he becomes a powerful minister in what's called the Nation of Islam. It's a religious movement that preaches Black self-resistance, discipline, and racial pride. He's very charismatic, controversial, but he's unafraid to criticize the racism in America. So early in his career, he argues that African Americans had the right to self-defense, not just nonviolence, and he rejects the idea of integration, calling instead for Black independence. So his views are going to change. He's going to leave the Nation of Islam in 64, and after he makes a pilgrimage to Mecca, he sees all different Muslims of all different races worshiping together. And so he decides that racial unity is actually possible. And he's going to organize Afro-American unity. And he's going to start shifting towards integration and global human rights. Malcolm X also is going to be assassinated in 1965. But the members of his Nation of Islam, they're going to continue to spread the movement. Then we also have, in this era that's referred to as Black Power era, you have the Black Panther Party. They are founded in 1966 in Oakland, California. And their idea is that they're going to openly carry weapons. They're going to kind of monitor police behavior. They're going to protect people from police brutality at these different protests. And they're often going to be portrayed as violent. The Panthers also ran important community programs. They did free breakfast programs for children, healthcare clinics, preschool services, but they really were fighting and demanding the end to police violence. They wanted the release of Black prisoners, and they wanted reparations for slavery. So there's a lot going on in this community. You have Martin Luther, you have both Black and white students fighting nonviolent protest. You have Malcolm X and his ideas coming about. You have the Black Panthers who are trying to protect people, whether or not they have to use violence, from violence that was coming for racial reasons alone. So you've got a lot of different things going on, trying to create and redefine what the Black identity is and what the political Black identity is. All right, we're going to look at legislation and what we have going on in legislation. So you have 65, the Civil Rights Movement, pushed for the nation to all confront these long-standing injustice. Again, Bloody Sunday, March 7th of 65, when President Johnson had to get involved to help protect African American voting rights. You also have the Voting Rights Act of 1965. You have the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It's going to outlaw any literacy tests, poll taxes, and anything else that might keep Black citizens in the South from voting. You also are going to have federal examiners monitor elections and enforce more fair voting practices. Okay, you have Miranda versus Arizona. That is having your rights read to you before you're arrested or before you speak. They have to read your Miranda rights. And 1967 is Thurgood Marshall. He is going to be the first Black man to be appointed to the Supreme Court. All right, so 1960, these were political assassinations. You had 1963, John F. Kennedy, he was in Dallas. 1965, Malcolm X. 1968, Martin Luther. And 1968, Robert Kennedy, who was Bobby Kennedy, who was John's brother. So all of these happened at different times. All the people were actually out. Martin Luther, you see right there on the left. He's outside a hotel. And then underneath that picture, you see people pointing to the rooftop. That was just when he got shot. Bobby Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy in 68. He's in a speech. You see all the people around him. Malcolm X is on your right, and he is at a church giving a speech, and all of them were assassinated. So why are there so many assassinations in the 1960s? It's very on the U.S. home front. You've got a lot of very different issues, a lot of forces colliding at once. You have civil rights, racial injustice, Vietnam. You have a lot of very angry white supremacists. You have segregationists. And then you have rival groups within the community, the Black community. You have the Vietnam War that divided the nation. You have political leaders questioning the war. You have all this different social and cultural and political upheaval. Race relations, gender roles, youth culture, political activism. So you have all these different extremists, radicalization, and you did not have, what you did not have before the 60s were presidents and national leaders did not have the level of protection that they have today. So all these assassinations were done in public places with minimum security. So that is kind of the reason given for why there are so many assassinations in the 1960s. I think that probably the biggest one is that they did not have the protection that they needed. Okay, so we also have the women's rights movement. NOW, NOW, which is a national organization for women in 1966. Betty Friedan with her book, Feminine Mystic. You had the Fight for Equal Pay Act, 1963. ERA, Equal Rights Amendment, originally introduced in 1923, revised in 1960. The main goal, eliminating any legal distinction between men and women, especially in jobs. You had nationwide women's strikes. You had the 50th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. You still had ongoing inequalities in education, employment, and childcare access. The ERA gained congressional approval, which actually the ERA is being threatened right now. It's being dismantled. You had major gains, you had major losses, but still you have women who are fighting for equality in the workforce outside of the domestic realm, basically. What else do we have? We wanted equal pay. That's about it for women. So you got to realize right now could not get a credit card. Women could not even have their own bank account at this time period. You could not divorce a man, and you could not control any money that you made on your own because you couldn't even have a bank account. No credit card, no bank account. Okay, the hippies. You know Miss Bennett likes the hippies. So this is again now 1960s. It's again activism. It's again young people. They are just going to want to live in peace. They're going to protest mainly against the devastation of the Vietnam War. They're going to blend anti-war activism with new styles of living, long hair, jeans, communal type living. They reject consumerism. They reject capitalism. Music is going to be a strong part of their movement. This is also when you have Woodstock. You're going to have drugs. Everything that they're working on is all about peace, freedom, love, stop the war, stop all of the hatred, all of the racial tension, the inequality between sexes, all of that kind of stuff. And bring back harmony, bring back cooperation. So you know this is going to be far off of what mainstream society is. Okay, so these are again against the Vietnam War. Like I said, the TV, the news is going to change all of that. What you have on the right-hand side, we won't fight another rich man's war. The songs, Cretan Clearwater Revival, all of this stuff, all of the songs, the music is all about the inequality, the injustice, this generation just demanding their voices be heard, that they had honesty, that they had justice, that we end this conflict, that everybody be treated equal, no matter who it was. Okay, so like I was saying before, some of the best music came out of this era. Creedence Clearwater Revival, it's a fantastic band, and a lot of their music is about what's going on in this time period, about Vietnam, about the home front. And Fortunate Son is talking directly to the people who are being drafted. You know, it says, I'm no senator's son, I ain't no fortunate one. And how it wasn't the rich sons that were going to war. It was the poor sons, the working class men who were sent to fight this war, and not anyone who had any money at all. It's really a great band and great songs.